Welcome in, everyone. New episode of Modern Symposium. We sticking a little away from politics of late, but regime change and a lot of people are talking, a lot of things to discuss. So kind of want to hop in here. Probably be a little shorter episode, just running through some of these executive orders. Some of the memes and things that are flying around right now with Trump coming into office. We actually already recorded a pretty exciting episode with some special guests. So stick around if you want to learn about the agricultural and environmentalism industry. We have our sponsors, Healing Roots, on. So that episode will be dropping soon. But today we're talking politics again. Richie, any initial thoughts?
I mean, we got a ton of executive orders under Trump, as he said he would on day one. I think, what are we on? Day 3 now of the Trump administration. Already a lot of good memes, already a lot of pretty significant changes, it looks like. And so I think the plan is here we can kind of run through some of these changes, see what we think, whether they're good, bad, what the results will be, kind of just run through the cultural side of it, maybe some of the the internet arguments and things like that are going on.
Yeah. So first thing I think we're going to start off with here, it's going to be not something that Trump did. It's something that his vice president did, maybe the acting president, some people are saying. Elon Musk's now infamous hand gesture, we'll call it. Pretty ridiculous thing to do. A lot of debate on whether it was intentional or unintentional. He pretty overtly throws up the Nazi Germany Sig Heil. Do you have any opening thoughts on that? Then I'll kind of get into what I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's highly unlikely that it was intentional. I mean, you got to give him a little bit of shit about it, because it's like that's just the one thing you don't want to do, on day one. Like, let's try to avoid doing that. But I mean, I don't think it's intentional. I think, once again, it's very difficult to even get people to, even if it were intentional, which I don't think it was, but even if it were, it'd be very difficult to get people to take it seriously. And I blame the media for that, because it's the same routine over and over again. And Elon's response was, hey, this whole everyone's Hitler thing is exhausting and no one cares, which is a good response, even though his was like the most blatant kind of like gesture or whatever you want to call it. It's like, all right, if they would have never said anything about this until now, everyone would be like, oh shit. But because they've been saying this, I don't think anyone cares.
Yeah. So my thoughts on it, I think there's like 3 scenarios, right? So if he did it intentionally, there's 2 different motives that there could be. If he intentionally did it because they're actually trying to bring in a wave of fascism, all right, obviously that's a horrible thing. If he did it intentionally, but as like a joke, he's like trying to troll somehow, I still think that's pretty goddamn unacceptable. That's not an okay form of trolling. So those are the 2 intentional ones. If you did it unintentionally, I still don't really think that's okay. I like to pass off, oh, he's kind of autistic, right? That's what some people are coming to his defense. Like, if you are so autistic that you can't realize you're throwing up a Sig Heil behind the presidential podium, you shouldn't be anywhere near the halls of power. I mean, if this was truly just a bat of, unintelligence, like what is he doing in this office? Like what's he gonna do next? Oh, he's just a little autistic. He just, authorized a bombing of something. Obviously he should, power over that sort of deal. But like, where do you draw the line on, like ignorance versus, like willful, intent? I don't know. Under any circumstance, I don't think it's acceptable.
I mean, I wouldn't say, assuming that it's unintentional, I wouldn't even say that that's like anything to do with intelligence. More so just, I guess, situational awareness for sure. But I mean, I wouldn't say, like, when it comes to intelligence, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, this guy's an idiot, because he probably is one of the smartest people in the world. But I think, when it comes to the whole idea of of the gesture, it doesn't really make much sense to me, because if you think about it, like, okay, so what would be the purpose? Say it was intentional. What would be the purpose of it? And one thing would be trolling, which I could see as a possibility. But if it were the first option you said, we're trying to start a wave of fascism, it's
That's
like,
right.
okay, well, like, let's look at, so I get, at least on my corner of the internet, there's two different groups of people talking about this. And one side is people on the left saying, look at what he just did. He just threw up the Nazi Heil. And the other side is people on the right saying, no, he didn't. He's not a Nazi. You guys are just doing the same thing you always do, making a big deal out of something that was unintentional. What I'm not seeing is a bunch of people saying, like, hell yeah, fascism's back. I don't see that mob. And so it's like, you know, if everyone on the side of Elon and of Trump are saying, like, no, it's not a Nazi sign, we're not Nazis, and everyone on the left is saying, yes, you are, and then it's like, okay, but where are the actual people who are like, yeah, we are? You know, those are the people I'm not seeing, and because of that, I feel like that's why it just it gets to the point where it doesn't even really matter. It's like, okay, I don't see a big wave of people who are Nazis, unless I'm not seeing that in my algorithm, which is possible too, but...
Yeah. I think the least likely of those three scenarios is that first one that, it's like, I'll throw up the Sig Heil because we're trying to implement fascism, right? If you're trying to implement fascism, you typically do it slowly in a, more nuanced way. I don't know, maybe they're at the end game. It's like, well, it's time. I don't know. I don't really see that as all that likely. If it's a troll, I don't think that's an acceptable form of trolling. And I don't know. Has he come out and said anything about it?
All he said was, the only thing I've seen at least was he tweeted back at one of the reports and said this everyone is Hitler routine is so tiring, like no one believes you anymore, or something like that. Which I think he's correct about. But I mean, he didn't actually acknowledge no, this is what I meant to do, and he didn't explain himself at all. He just said he kind of just waved him off.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like at the least you maybe say that's not what I was doing. I don't know. Maybe you feel like he's above it, that, oh, this is so ridiculous that I shouldn't even have to, answer this accusation. That could be it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because it's like, if every single time the media keeps calling these guys Hitler and they have to keep coming out, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that. And it's like, it's just a way to kind of, it's like a power game almost, where they're like, all right, we're like, who gives a shit what they're even saying, because, that, like you said, we're above it, we don't care. I think that's their mentality.
Yeah. I don't know. All right, you want to start doing some of these executive orders?
Yeah, so looking at one, I was confused earlier because I saw the one about the American flags. I thought it was like no one is allowed to wave any flags other than the American flag. After I looked into it, I realized it's only U.S. embassies, which, I mean, if it was everyone, I would be like, what is, that is, now we're talking maybe a little bit of fascism,
Yeah.
but I think the U.S. embassies makes a little more sense.
I mean, yeah, I don't really know if I have a problem with that. I didn't really. If you're a government building, what other flags should you be flying besides, your flag, realistically
Right.
speaking? I don't think I really have any problems with that one.
I think the target on that, I think, was the LGBTQ flag, because that apparently there was a lot of government buildings during Pride Month, putting up the LGBTQ flag. And I think it was just like a direct attack on that, we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah,
But
that's a bit crazy. I don't know. It's one of those things that it might not seem all too bad at the start. Then just all right, if they are going after LGBTQ things, what's the next step they take towards that, right? Now, are they going to go after same-sex marriage? What's the playbook essentially?
yeah, well, I know I would agree on that, but I think it's more so, it's less about anti-gay, or I don't think it's really addressed at the LGBTQ people. I think it's more addressed at this institutional, it's kind of a DEI attack. It's like an institutional attack where it's like, okay, we've got all of, if we're putting up the LGBTQ flag and we're doing all of these, DEI programs, and we've got entire government agencies dedicated to diversity, equity, inclusion, and all this kind of like woke, kind of semi-communist stuff where it's like, it's kind of more of a cultural, like, all right, we're not doing that anymore. We're back to a meritocracy. And, whether, gay, straight, whatever, everyone's American. So this is the flag that's going to represent all the people. We're not just going to put up, some flag for some type of like activist group. But I mean, I can see both sides of that one.
Yeah. Along the same lines, I think, is this one, restoring names that honor American greatness. This is the one that has renamed Mount McKinley back to Mount McKinley. I believe it was Mount Denali for a while. Had originally been Mount McKinley, back to Mount McKinley. And now the Gulf of Mexico is now the Gulf of America. So I don't really know what this one's about either, to be honest.
So yeah, I mean the Gulf of America one, I think is kind of just like a meme it's just like a Trump flexing kind of thing, because like it doesn't change anything. It's like, all right, fine, it's Gulf of America now, who cares? But when it comes to like the naming of the military bases and stuff, that one I think has more of an actual impact, because I think there's a lot of voters who were pissed off that the names got changed. And I've talked to a lot of these because for work, I work in a lot of military bases, and I've talked to local contractors around the areas and stuff, and I would refer to them as their new names because that's what the title of the project was. But they would be like, nah, it's not. It's not Fort Eisenhower. It's Fort Gordon is one example in Georgia, and I think there's a few others. But yeah, I think like changing the names to begin
changed
with
it from Gordon to Eisenhower. I mean, that Eisenhower is like pretty goddamn American. So who was Gordon that we had to change it off of?
No, it was, or wait, yes. I think it was, I don't know actually, but it was something where, I'm, if I'm remembering right, most of these were changed during 2020 when everything was declared racist. And so I don't know who Fort Gordon is named after. If you want to ask the overlords maybe, but I know that there were some that were, based on like Confederate generals and stuff like that, which is fair. I mean, they went to war with us and we won, so I don't know why it should be named after them. But
yeah, John Brown Gordon, a Confederate general and Georgia governor.
Yeah, right. So I mean, that one I think is fair, but there's others where it's like, they're tearing down statues of Jefferson and stuff like that, where it's like, okay, let's even though some of these guys are like Columbus Day changed to Indigenous Peoples Day, it's like, all right, even though some of these guys might have done things that we would see as evil, terrible things in our time, that's not what the statue's there to honor. The statue's not there to honor Christopher Columbus's racism. It's there to honor his, discovery and investigation of the Americas, and, same with Jefferson and all of them. So
yeah, this one's a pretty interesting one to me. Like, I'd say like naming things, like naming a building after like a Confederate person, I think we can do away with that. Now, something like, like statues about them, I think that's a little bit different story. Like statues are art. There's art from hundreds of years before us, thousands of years before us about, like people who lost wars, like people whose ideologies have gone out the window, and like you don't just destroy pieces of art just because like you might not agree with the ideology, right? It's a fine line as well. Again, you shouldn't be like glorifying the antebellum South, right? But at the same time, it is a part of our history, and it is an art, and I think that censoring of art is a pretty big deal. So that one's just a pretty interesting to me. I see both sides of the argument for that one for sure.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a fine line, like you said, where yes, I think you said it well said. You don't want to glorify it, but at the same time, it is history, it is art, and so it's like, let's not just erase it,
Right. Also, pretend it never happened, right?
Yeah, right.
Those who forget your history are bound to repeat it, right?
Yep, exactly.
Declaring a national emergency at the southern border of the United States. So this one, I think what we want to talk about a little bit, not so much about like immigration policy right now. I think me and Richie on this one we want to talk about is the fact that declaring a national emergency, right? We also declared a national energy emergency. And do we really have a national energy emergency? No, not that I know of. Like, people aren't without energy. That's what an emergency would be. If like some snowstorm rocked Dallas and their grid went down, which it does like every year now, like that's an emergency. Not the fact that like Richie had texted me the other day, like Russia or China might be outproducing us by like a couple thousand kilowatts or whatever.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, it just, and this is a pretty bipartisan one too, because they all do this, but they just declare anything
Right.
an emergency,
Right.
just so that they can. I mean, they did it with COVID too, which that was actually a bit of an emergency, but like they just do that with everything. It's an energy emergency. Why? Oh, because we're just not producing as much energy as we forecasted this year, or something. It's like, all right, it's not really an emergency though, but it's just kind of like the spinning of reality. It's like, oh yeah, when everything's an emergency, it's no wonder why the news cycles last a day and everyone's constantly freaking out. It's because they're incentivized to make everything into an emergency and a crisis when take a walk outside, everything's fine,
Right. Dude, over the past few months, I've thought numerous times over, just, I gotta get off social media, dude. It just destroys your brain.
Oh
And
yeah.
not just like the, like, oh, 5 second instant gratification, which that destroys your dopamine receptors as well. Just the fact that every 3 days there's some new insane controversy that's gonna threaten our way of life. And then, like you said, just take a walk outside and everything's the exact same. It's manufactured for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I took a little break after the election just because that was where it was like at its peak, and it was pretty nice. It was like, yeah, you got to get back down to earth. You spend too much time in the void, you're gonna go nuts.
Dude, I was watching White Lotus the other day, and it's like two couples, and the one couple's talking about like how they might not have kids, because of the state of the world and everything. Like, we don't know if we bring up a child in these circumstances. The other couple's like, what circumstances? They're like, what do you mean? Like, do you not follow the news? They're like, oh, no, we don't really get into that kind of stuff. And like, there's like, so happy, so like out of it, like, I think I might kind of want to be like that.
I
Just
know, yeah.
oblivious and happy.
Yeah, no, I mean, personally, I enjoy following it, and but because of, I think that I can look at it and not actually freak out about anything. Like, I like to watch it, but I don't like to take it seriously, really. Like, if I'm watching this election, it's almost like I'm watching the Bears-Packers game, like, realistically, nothing's gonna affect me that much, is at least my mentality going into it. And I think that's healthy. There has been times, though, where I've, like, started to get real frustrated and seeing, things going on where it was like, all right, but nothing changed. So, worrying about it is the problem. It's,
Right. It's,
uh,
and this is kind of the philosophy too. It's like, you can't control most of what happens to you. What you can control is your reaction to what
yeah,
happens. So that's
yeah,
just
that's
an important thing to keep in mind.
it's the Stoics, right? Was that Marcus Aurelius, someone
I
like that?
believe, yeah. And I think that's a lot of it too. It's like, I think that may have started with Stoicism, but I think if you read like a lot of people, philosophy, like that's a pretty underlying one. It's like, you can only control what you can control, essentially, which is only like your thoughts, actions, and like your responses to things are like the only things you can actually control. And everything else that you can't control, you can't control it. So why worry about it?
Yeah, right. Worrying about it isn't going to help. So,
Right.
but we were on the emergency at the
Yeah.
border,
Yeah.
and we can kind of segue into then the birthright citizenship one that we've been talking
Yeah.
about, which, if you want to kind of explain it, I know it seems to be in violation of the 14th Amendment, but
Yeah, no. So 14th Amendment, and let me pull that up real quick. I don't want to get the verbiage wrong. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. There's a few more lines, but that's the big part of it, right? That says if you're born in the U.S., you are a citizen, right? So the little loophole that they're trying to say that, kids born from illegal immigrants don't apply here is, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So they're saying they are not subject to the jurisdiction in the United States since they're not a citizen, therefore their kids aren't citizens. My objection to that would be, well, if you're admitting that you do not have jurisdiction over these people, then how do you have any, like, could you throw them in jail if they commit murder? Yes, absolutely you could, because you have jurisdiction over them because they're in your country. So I think that's just kind of it's just the way they're doing it, that they're using that line. I think that's just like not right at all.
Yeah, I mean that it seems like it makes sense when it comes to an incentive structure. Like that line specifically doesn't seem to make sense. But the idea of putting a stop to birthright citizenship, I wouldn't really be in favor of a full stop, but some stricter kind of restrictions on it. It's probably not the best solution, but it's not a bad solution either, because it does have a big impact on the immigration problem, the illegal immigration problem, which is that it takes away an incentive where, if everyone can come in here. I saw earlier that just in 2024 alone, there were 400,000 babies born to undocumented immigrants in the United States, where is like now that's 400,000 more people who have technically citizenship. Whereas like if the incentive is to just come in, have a baby, and now you're saved and now you're good, it's a good incentive to incentivize people to come in illegally, which I think taking that incentive away might help the problem. But it might not be the best solution though either, because I'm pretty sure I saw this that technically if this law were to have been implemented back in the day, that both J.D. Vance and Trump's wives would not be considered citizens.
Yeah. So that's, and then, so another thing, there's a cutoff date for it, right? It's not that they shouldn't be allowed to, go after any people who were born here in the last like year or whatever, that's going to like start at a future date, right?
Yeah, I think it was in February it starts. So any child born in the United States to non-citizens starting in February would not receive citizenship. Now, I wonder if there would be an easy path to citizenship. If maybe all the parents got to do is sign something, but they're just not granted citizenship automatically. Something like that, I think might work, but I don't know. I mean, we'll see how that goes. I don't think it's an evil racist policy like the media tries to say. It might not be the best, but I'm still kind of wrapping my head around what I think that's going to lead to.
Well, and then, all right, if the 14th Amendment goes by the wayside, I think technically none of us are citizens for the most part. The only reason we're citizens is because of our birthright. We were born here, right? And it's one of those things that like, all right, at what point, who can they determine to not be a citizen? I don't know.
Well, I don't think it's trying to do away with the 14th Amendment. What I read was that it's if you were born to, if neither of your parents are citizens, then that's when you would not receive birthright citizenship. But if you're born to parents, or I think just one parent is a citizen, then you are still automatically granted citizenship. So like everyone who was, assuming that your parents were citizens when you were born, you're good. The trouble is when your parents are like on visas and stuff like that, and because there's something called I was just looking at it earlier. There's something called it's like birth tourism or something like that they're calling it, where there's people who are just getting very like temporary visas while they're pregnant so that they can have a kid in the United States. Just kind of just taking advantage of the rule, which I think that's what the goal is to stop. But
And then one last thing I kind of want to point out on this one is the 14th Amendment was put into place to overturn the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott being that if you are a black person born in the United States, that you did not receive citizenship. And that's what the 14th Amendment is essentially overturning. For that reason, very good thing to have. So I just one final piece I wanted to throw in there.
Yeah, right. But now I would say too on that is that I also read that was the initial purpose of it. It was right after the Civil War, where the initial purpose of it was that former slaves would be granted citizenship and Southern states couldn't discriminate against them. very good. But now here we are, going on 200 years later, and the initial purpose of the rule, the initial purpose of that particular law, the birthright citizenship, is no longer utilized for that purpose. It's now being taken advantage of by people who are trying to get into the country illegally and have a child. That way, um, they're now citizens. It's kind of being taken advantage of, whereas like it's no longer used for the initial purposes that it was meant for.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Yeah, no, all right, if illegal immigration is an issue, like I don't know if it is, I probably is, like that's just, you have to have, set control, like, amount of people that you want to have in, right? If you have overcrowded cities, then, that's an issue, obviously. You need some form of, protection, some form of barrier to entry, essentially. And I don't know. The thing is, I think most other countries do have birthright citizenship as well. Like if your parents were on vacation and you're born in like Switzerland, I think you would technically have Swiss citizenship.
Mhm.
So I kind of, on some of these cases, I look to like what all other countries are doing because, I don't think that America is so exceptional that, we have our own rules that other people shouldn't have to like worry about. And, I think if everyone around the world is doing it, probably a good thing to have. I understand where this one's coming from though, so I don't know. Tough question, really.
Yeah, it's just, and yeah, there's no solutions, just trade-offs. So it's really a trade-off
Yeah,
between, do we want to kind of realign the incentive structure so that people can no longer take advantage of the system, but then the trade-off would be, well, at the same time, we are then going to probably hurt people who are innocent people who, like we're going to have a less adequate policy that takes individual freedom and ability to be part of a nation. It kind of takes away from that. So
yeah. And dude, like it's like if this was, one step of the plan, right? Like realigning incentive structures, like you said, like if we made it much, much easier to come in the front door legally, then, like this could be a good thing, right? It just like, it kind of has to be like like a all involved sort of deal and not just, like a half-assed, like, this will probably solve the problem, right?
yeah, yeah, and hopefully that's what the goal is. But yeah, I agree. That's one small part of a full restructuring that probably needs to happen.
Yeah. Move on to the next one.
Yeah, yeah. What do we got next here? How about
I got, what do you
or
got?
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
All right, I got, delivering emergency price relief for American families and defeating the cost of living crisis. So this was basically, I think, the second thing that he ran on. The first thing being immigration, I would say was the biggest one that he ran on. The second one being, like, I'm going to lower the price of eggs, right? I think that was like the big one. I saw this video the other day saying like every election cycle, whoever loses always comes up with one singular excuse for why they lost, right? So this time they're saying Biden lost because of the price of eggs, right? And then when Trump lost in 2020, what were they saying? I feel what the Trump one was, but then like 2016 is like, oh, Hillary lost like because of like just this one little thing, like she was like had an unlikable personality or whatever, right?
Yeah, in
Extremely,
2020, I remember hearing in 2020 a lot, at least from the conservative side, the excuse they gave was that people were just tired and they wanted boring. They didn't want chaos anymore. They wanted
yeah,
a man who's barely alive and doesn't talk much, and
yeah,
that's what they
yeah.
got.
So on this one though, this cost of living one, I wanted to read the like last paragraph it had here. This shall include pursuing appropriate actions to lower the cost of housing and expand housing supply. This one, if they actually do this, I could not agree more with. I have read a lot of things like why is housing so expensive in America now? And really, it seems like there's a lot of issues. Some people blame it on private equity buying up all the houses, and I've seen things like, oh, it's not really that. what it comes down to, for the most part that I've seen, is supply. We've literally just stopped building houses. And the reason we stopped building houses is, one, the NIMBY, not in my backyard, right? You don't want low-income housing built in your neighborhood because it's going to, in theory, drive down the price of your value. And two, if you build more houses, whoever owns houses, that's intrinsically going to lower the price of your house because there are alternatives out there. So people who own houses have stopped legislation to build houses. That's where like all this like coding issues come in. Like, oh, well, you can't build houses within 300 yards of any like stop sign. That's not a real saying, but like ridiculous zoning laws like that. So if they actually do like maybe like restrict some of those zoning issues and expand housing supply, I will be very happy with that one.
Yeah, no, I would too. I like that one. I just don't know. I don't know what the policy is. Like, we could say, oh yeah, we're going to bring housing prices down, and here you go. Now they're down. It's like, all right, well, how are we going to do it? That's what it really comes down to.
So this is the one I'm actually like trying to give some like props to them for, because I think this is one they actually can do. I'm going to read out like 5 or 6 other ones that I don't really think they can do, because this one I think is something the government can do. They can strike down those zoning issues, and then like, I don't know, maybe give some kind of like subsidies to like construction companies, saying like, all right, we'll front like 20% of your costs or whatever. I'm not a
even just
builder or whatever, but like that's something I think they actually can do.
Even just eliminating some unnecessary regulation could be huge, because regulation is cost. And so it's like, it might not be cost efficient for a company to be like a house building company right now because of all the regulation. They get rid of some of it. I mean, I'm sure some of it's good, but some of it's probably unnecessary. They get rid of some of that. Well, that just lowers the cost, increases profit margins. Now you got more people who are incentivized to go build houses. So I agree. I think there's a lot of ways it could happen.
So that one I would love to see. If we could do that, I'd be in. Eliminate unnecessary administrative expenses and rent-seeking practices that increase healthcare costs. I've read that line like 8 times over. I don't really know what that one means.
Wait, read that one again.
Eliminate unnecessary administrative expenses and rent-seeking practices that increase healthcare costs.
I'm wondering what rent-seeking practices
has to do with increasing healthcare costs.
Well, so yeah, here I asked the overlords. In the context of healthcare, it refers to activities by individuals, organizations, or companies that aim to increase their income or market share without providing additional value to society. So I think, and I've seen that term before, like outside of the context of homes, when we're talking business, but I couldn't really remember what it meant. But I think it's just basically like, there's ways that they can increase their profits that's not actually increasing their productivity. Whereas like Apple, for example, I know they called it like rent seeking because they wanted to increase their profits, but they didn't invent anything new or increase their output. So they just bumped up. Now everyone who uses the App Store has to pay them more. And it's like, okay, you're just squeezing other companies now. You're not doing anything more. So I guess is that
maybe with like insurance companies, sort of? It's like, all right, like they're not providing like anything else. They're just like increasing their profit margins.
I think so. I think
okay.
I would guess, I mean, just based on that idea, I think that would make a lot of sense, actually. Rent seeking, meaning, insurance companies intentionally raising costs, knowing that they can make more profit if it costs more and that the people don't really have a choice. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. That one, I still don't really know. Create employment opportunities for American workers. Great. Like that sounds great. Like, what are you going to actually do about that? That one's just one you throw in there for like buzzwords, it seems like.
Yeah, right. I mean, it depends on how you're going to do it. If you're, that could be a good one or a bad one.
That's when you said like, well, how are you going to do it? Like, all right, maybe you say like, we're going to do like a federal like highway cleanup. All right, that's a way to create jobs, right? Or we're gonna plant like 1 million acres of trees. That's a way to create jobs. You can't just say like, we're gonna create employment opportunities, right? That's not nice. Include oh, that's funny. So it's going to create employment opportunities for American workers, including drawing discouraged workers into the labor force. What?
Yeah, I mean that means nothing.
That means nothing.
That's
Uh-huh.
not really a
That
policy.
means nothing. Eliminate harmful, coercive, quote unquote, climate policies that increase the cost of food and fuel. I'm a pretty big environment guy. I'm pretty against that one. I don't think we should be throwing our, clean air and water away for slightly lower costs of food and fuel personally.
I think that's another one I would put is okay. How
Yeah.
more specifically because I'm also pro climate and I don't want the world to burn anytime soon. But I would say also that there are probably a lot of government bureaucrats who and even private company CEOs and owners who are using the whole climate activism movement as just a way to kind of fill their their bank accounts. So depending on what it is specifically, I could be against it, could be for it.
You got another one. I have one more on mine pulled up.
Yeah, I've got a couple more. One of them was the pardons. What do you think about the pardons? I think
Yeah.
we saw it coming a mile away. You knew he was going to do that, and I mean, I think that he's partially correct that the people who were arrested for January 6th, a lot of them were somewhat political prisoners, I would say. I mean, the sentences they were receiving for, like, compared to any other circumstance, people have gotten way shorter sentences for way more violent or more extreme crimes, where some of these people were getting, like, one guy just walked into the Capitol building. He got like 40 years or something crazy. It's like, all right, so I think we saw it coming. We knew it was going to happen. I think it's obviously a little bit politically motivated, politically biased. I don't like that, but I do think the reason they were still in jail in the first place was for political reasons too. So
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of the people who were there just kind of got like swept in, and not like, oh, like they had no choice to enter the Capitol, but just one of those things when you have like hive mind working, it's like, oh, everyone's running in. I bet 80-90% of the people were just like, dude, fuck it. I want to go into the Capitol, right? Like, and yeah, they weren't intending on overthrowing the government, most of them, whatever. I think some of them should probably still be in prison. And, I don't really know how it works, like being, oh, we're back to the blue, and then you are releasing guys who are like beating up cops, like tasing them and like fucking like hitting them with flagpoles and shit. And, I do think that, insurrection should be, punished. You shouldn't be allowed to, try and overthrow the counting of our votes. I don't even know what that day actually is. It was a day that no one had ever actually even like known was a thing before, right? Or that actually happened.
yeah, well, yeah, no, I would agree. Any violence, people are like beating up cops and stuff, then yeah, they should probably still be in prison. I agree on that. But I think that it's the whole issue of January 6th has become so politicized where it's hard to have, like, you knew Trump was going to do that because he almost has to, because it's like, that's just the type of guy he is, that he's loyal to his supporters and he views them as supporters. The other side views them as violent insurrectionists. And it's like, there's no real clear, no one's thinking with a straight head on their shoulders in this situation. One other one though was, did you see?
Doesn't this create a bad incentive structure though? Of, all right, now if you don't like the election results, you can just march in and try and stop it. Isn't that a bad incentive?
Yeah, but I don't think this creates it. I think this incentive structure has already been existing, because look, I mean, the same day Biden pardoned his entire family, he pardoned Fauci, which that's kind of a concerning one. What did Fauci need a pardon for? Like what the hell is he doing? All that. So it's kind of
that one might have been maybe like a preemptive, like, he tries to go after Fauci, like I'll just pardon him so he like can.
Yeah, right.
The Hunter Biden one, I don't know if we've said this one on camera. I texted this to Richie the other day. That one cracked me up because, typically for like a pardon, you'll get like for a specific act, right? I'm pardoning you for this. Hunter Biden's pardon was it was a blanket pardon for anything he had done for the past 11 years. So think about that for a second. 11 years. It's not 10 years. It's not 15. It's not 20. It's not a nice round number. What did you do between year 11 that warranted, like, actually, we got to push that out one more year? So
Yeah,
I don't know.
they were about to give him 10 years, and then he was like, oh, wait, when was
Yeah,
that? 2013. Hey,
right,
make it 11. Yeah.
right.
But no, I don't think blanket pardon should be a thing. I think we do away with that because it's like the whole point of a pardon is, it's like it's supposed to be for specific action. That's, it's supposed to be for a situation whereas like, okay, yeah, I think that this person is unjustly, like, has been unjustly imprisoned or charged with a crime, and so as president, I have the power to pardon them. Whereas it's like you can't just throw it out like, yeah, I don't even know what the crime is, but whatever he did, he's, it's like what you find out he murdered 20 people. It's like, oh, he got a pardon.
Honestly,
like,
I think I'd be cool with getting away with all pardons. Like really, what's like the theory behind that? Like one guy can just like determine like, actually our entire system was wrong. All of the courts were wrong. The law is wrong. I'm right.
Yeah,
Like
no, I mean, that's an interesting one too.
I don't really, the theory behind that one, I don't really know if that one holds much water. It's supposed to be another check, right? It's supposed to be like the executives check on the other two, right? Like, oh, if they don't agree. But that being said, the president would have signed that law into being. The courts then uphold that law. I don't know. That one doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, how that's even a thing in the first place.
Yeah, no, I mean, it kind of like, yeah, I don't know. I got to kind of look into how that even started. That is a good question. Did you see that other guy he pardoned? I'm forgetting his name, Ross something, the guy who created the Silk Road.
Okay, that one I'm in on. I like that one.
I know, yeah, I like
Yeah.
that one too. Because that guy, that's a perfect example. And the Libertarian Party has been backing this guy for years. But that is a good example of like, why is that guy in jail for the rest of his life? He just created a website or a platform, and then illegal activity took place on the platform. Yeah, same with like Zuckerberg and Elon and every platform.
Right.
It's like, why did they just screw that guy over? I think the answer is because
It's
they were
because they
using
can't control
crypto.
it.
Well, yeah, right. They're using crypto and not U.S. dollars. That's the answer. But
Yeah, I think that one's like, oh, like, all right, like if we can like see it on like Facebook or Meta or Instagram, we can like control the narrative a little bit. We can like control what's happening. Like the Silk Road was just like not really attached to any government, not really attached to anything, any country. And that was probably just scary for him. Just control, typical. Yeah. Can't let the people, decide and talk amongst themselves. You want to talk about TikTok?
Yeah, I've got two more executive orders on the list, and then I also had TikTok I want to go through too. So,
Dude, the TikTok one was interesting. I didn't realize this, but TikTok is still banned. Nothing actually like happened.
so okay, so now, yeah, how exactly did all that go down?
Dude, so all right, I know you're not a big TikTok guy, so maybe you're not familiar, but like, so for like weeks now, it had been like, all right, TikTok bans coming in like, I forget what day, like January 19th or 18th, 20th, I don't know. The day before, they put out like a message on like your home screen or whatever. Like as soon as you open up the app, it's like, unfortunately, like due to like regulations, TikTok will be going dark or whatever. Hopefully President Trump will be able to like stop this, right? Then it goes dark for like 6 to 8 hours overnight. And then the next day it's back up online saying, thank you to President Trump for saving TikTok or whatever, right? The thing is, one, Trump wasn't in office then, so he like couldn't have saved it. Two, it's not even unbanned. If you go on the App Store right now, TikTok is not on. So TikTok is banned. This is playing out exactly as it would have played out, without all that like pomp and circumstance. It was never going to be like, it's like taken off your phone. The way it's going to play out now, if nothing else happens, is the app's slowly just going to become unusable because you can't download updates, right? So nothing actually really changed. I think what that whole thing was I think TikTok was trying to play into like Trump's ego. Like, oh, if we put this like banner on there, maybe he will actually save it. I think that's what that whole thing was.
Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing, that this definitely, the fact that it went down for such a short period of time and then came back up and said, oh, thank you, President Trump is, I feel like either they're trying to do that preemptively, in order to win his favor, or I was thinking even possibly is that, Trump already kind of made some backdoor deal where he's like, all right, here, and that was part of the deal was like, yeah, you got to give me credit for it coming back, and then I won't tariff you or whatever, like some shit like that.
So here's the conspiracy now. Maybe a backdoor deal did happen. In those 6 to 8 hours when it was down, people are saying that the TikTok servers went down and they're now on Meta servers. People are now saying that, like, so immediately after the app came back live, you could sign up for TikTok through Facebook. And that was never a thing before. You can now link your Meta accounts in TikTok. That was never a thing before. People saying their algorithms are totally different now. They're not showing anything about California wildfires, the dude that shot the healthcare CEO, like other like big like scary things. They're not showing that on like the feeds now. People think that maybe like something did happen in those 6 to 8 hours. Meta got some backdoor deal that hasn't been announced or something.
That I have not heard that one, and that makes a lot of sense because, I mean, Zuck has been all over Trump ever since pretty much ever since the election. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, it might be a good thing, but what doesn't make sense then? Well, I guess maybe it just hasn't gotten there yet. I don't know. That's a confusing one kind of because, for one, I was for the TikTok ban, honestly, because it does seem like a conflict of interest to have a rival superpower basically put their spies into the pockets of all the Americans. I was for the TikTok ban.
Shouldn't we be allowed to decide where our data goes, though? Like, we can only give our data to Musk and Zuck. Like, that's all that's allowed. Like, we're not allowed to like give it to China.
I mean, maybe if that's a good, interesting point too, because yeah, it is about, we do have free choice. But I guess this is what I would say. I would think this would be the answer is, okay, fine. Let's just keep TikTok the way it is. But if we want to do that, and Trump says this and he's right about this, is that if we were to ban TikTok, if no more Americans are using it, who's hurt the most? It's China by far. They're going to get crushed. And so they have a massive incentive to make sure that doesn't happen. Whereas we can go without banning it from all Americans if China releases the ban on Meta, because right now Facebook isn't allowed to operate in China. And so basically they're taking in a bunch of American data where we're not getting their data. And so it's just going to give them a huge advantage when it comes to AI and everything, where it is kind of a threat. It's like one of those where it's like similar to the climate change thing where like, yeah, shouldn't we be allowed to dump our oil into the ocean? No one owns the ocean, and I own all this oil, and if I want to dump it in the ocean, why do I get penalized? And it's like, because it's an existential problem. Whereas if they keep taking in our data at this rate, then their AI and their technology is going to advance so much faster than ours that could then be a security threat.
That's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about it that way. I didn't know Facebook was banned in China either.
Yeah, and I think that is the big problem right there. If it went both ways, I think that's good for everyone. Then everyone advances. But because they're cutting us off, I think it's a fair retaliation to cut them off too. I'm hoping they just release the gates and everything's open.
Do we really want to be like China in that aspect, though? Banning websites, banning apps?
I would prefer not. I would prefer that they be more like us. But if the options are, if they're not going to do that, and so the options are, it's like, it's kind of a little bit of the military industrial complex, or the mutually assured destruction, where it's like, all right, if we've got to play by the same rules, and so if they're going to do it, we kind of don't really have much of a choice but to do something in retaliation. Now, I think banning platforms that are technically for speech, as you know, I'm never really a fan of that. But I mean, I don't know. I'm hoping that there'll be some type of negotiation where they can even the playing field.
What I've been on my side of the algorithm on TikTok for the past like couple months, people are saying like, it's not about our data. It's about the fact that like this app, you can truly like reach people on like a different level than you can on like other apps, right? So people are saying like, it's about like limiting our like collective power, essentially our ability to collectivize and like, go against, some norms and, some laws that we don't see right versus, like kind of getting our data. So I don't know.
I don't know about that one. I see the point, but also, I mean, there's no reason we couldn't do that on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, same thing. It's just that those companies are owned by Americans, and so we don't want another government taking all our data and using it against us. Our own government wants to take our data and use it against us. So I can see it's not in America's interest to have China taking. I think they care primarily about the data, just because data is the new oil, and so it's like they have all the resource. They're taking in way more resources than we are. For all of human history, it's always been nations battling over resources. I think it's one of those games. But one thing I hate, and I saw this, don't know if it's true, I'm not on TikTok like you said, but I saw something that the words "Free Palestine" is being labeled as like some type of hate speech or something, and getting people's content removed from TikTok. Have you seen anything about that?
Yeah, no. I think after the switch over, there's certain phrases that you're not allowed to say anymore. You're not allowed to type the words Donald Trump election interference. That one gets you banned.
Yeah, I mean that one I hate, because that is the exact thing that supposedly Trump was fighting against. And it goes
Yeah.
both ways. You can't just get into power and then turn around and do the exact same thing, the exact same authoritarian, tyrannical thing that the opposing side did to you. It's like, I don't like that.
Well,
So
let me segue there. I didn't have this one pulled up. It's restoring freedom of speech and ending federal censorship, right? So
sounds
that
good.
the right's been all about, well, they've been censoring us. We can't speak our mind, right? After Elon Musk threw up that Sig Heil, a weather girl in Milwaukee posted on her Instagram account, like saying like, like calling him a Nazi, right? Saying like, apparently we have like a guy throwing up like the Nazi salute. She got fired the next day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, was that the choice of? I wonder. I think the difference would be, was that the choice of the company, or was it the choice of the government? When there's government pressure, I'd be opposed to it. Whereas, like in the Twitter files, they showed how the FBI was pressuring them to censor this content. Like, that's no good. But if like if I were to get on this podcast and start saying some outlandish shit, and my company chooses to fire me because it's bad publicity, that I think is fair game.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like the next day though. Like I don't know. Like that kind of seems like freedom of speech being censored there. No, it is
Yeah, I mean,
different between
it's not
government
the government.
and
Yeah,
business. It depends what it is,
primarily
I
is
guess.
my primary concern with freedom of speech would be the government. But I would think that based on how things are going, it definitely seems like the government is the government should not have a hand on the scale in any way. Whereas, like, I mean, Zuckerberg came out and admitted it and showed it. Elon showed it with the Twitter files, where they keep doing this to these private companies. Whereas, like, that's not how it should be done. And if that's what they're doing in TikTok too now with the Free Palestine thing, and it's like, I'm not even really a super pro Palestine. I'm kind of a little bit on the fence on that whole issue, but it's like, it doesn't matter. No matter what you're saying, you should be allowed to say it. And the counter to that should be opposing speech, not banning speech.
Yeah. So the last one I had, which this is a good segue, rules for thee, not for me sort of deal, ending the weaponization of the federal government. So you said that one, you like that one. It sounds good in theory, right? Really, what I think this one's going to boil down to is kind of what you said about the Inflation Reduction Act, how they call it the Inflation Reduction Act, and then it just increases inflation. I think this is going to be the same thing, because here's here's one of the passages from that. The Attorney General, in consultation with the heads of department agencies of the U.S., shall take appropriate action to review the activities of departments and civil or criminal enforcement authority in the U.S., including the DOJ, SEC, FTC, over the last 4 years, and identify any instances where a department or agency's conduct appeared to be contradictory to the purposes and policies of this order, and a report shall be submitted to the President through the Deputy Chief of Staff. about remedial actions to be taken to fulfill these policies. That just sounds like he's literally saying we're going to weaponize the federal government to go against the guys who weaponize the federal government.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. And I mean, this is exactly, I mean, we've been talking about this where that's why you can't do this because, yeah, I mean, if that's the case, then I'm opposed to it because it should be, what I was hoping for would be some new kind of policy designs that makes it so that like no one can do that, like Trump can't get into office now and just start targeting political opponents just because they did it to him. The reason I supported Trump was because they did it to him, and I didn't like that. And so I want to vote against the guys who did that. So I don't want to vote for a guy so that he can get in and then do the same thing. And that's just, if that stays that way, it's going to keep happening worse and worse and worse. And eventually, every president just gets put in jail immediately after they get out. It's like, or every federal employee.
According to that language, it sounds much more like tit for tat than it does for ending the practice. So,
yeah, no, that doesn't sound good.
So, you got any other ones before we wrap this up?
Yeah, so I had two other ones. First one is the Panama Canal. You see that one? Taking it back.
I heard him talk about it. Did he sign something?
There was something, I think, or maybe he didn't sign it. Maybe he was just talking about it. But we're taking it back. That's an interesting one because I didn't know this until I heard him talking about it. But I did look it up, and yeah, he always says these things that sound kind of ridiculous, but then it turns out they're not entirely wrong. And he's talking about how China controls the Panama Canal. And I'm like, I've never heard that before. And so I started asking the overlords, looking at it. And it turns out, yeah, there's 5 ports in the Panama Canal. We have one. I think Mexico has one. I think another country has one. And China has the other 2. And I think the ones that China has are like the biggest where they control like the majority of passage through it, which is like, okay, how did that become a thing? How did it end up like that? I don't know, but I do think he's kind of right about that. Whereas we should probably make sure that we should probably do something about that.
I mean, I guess if China runs it, I guess we'd rather run it. I haven't really looked into that one. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I don't know too much about it either, but that could be.
Can we just like say that, like, like that's ours now? Like we're controlling it, not you.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, yeah, we can say it and we can try to do it. I'm sure we'll see some resistance. So I don't know. That one kind of an interesting one.
Well, because we built it, and then I think we operated and controlled it for a while, and then it was like, well, what the fuck? Like you can't just like own this thing on our territory. So I think we gave it back to Panama, and then maybe they from there like gave out the rights to other countries to use it, and maybe that's where we got today.
I think so, because how like, and this is weird too, but it's.
But then wouldn't that be like acceptable if they want China to have 2 ports? Then isn't that like kind of their decision? It's not really our decision to make.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely like the strongman argument where it's like, the big boss is in charge now, and we're gonna take that shit back from you. Which I don't know how well that'll go with Panama, but I also don't know if Panama can do anything about it. But it's also kind of reminds me of how it's weird that, like, when I first started hearing about this a couple of years ago, I was thinking, like, how does that even make sense? But, China owns, like, a lot of the land in the United States.
Yeah.
Like, there's, like, military bases where China owns the surrounding land. Like, how does that work? Are we we're just selling our land to other countries?
Oh, dude, a lot of our farmland is owned by not us.
Yeah, right. I mean, I feel like that's something that's, you'd think there'd be some security threats there.
Right.
I don't know how that works. And then the other one was, I know he just retracted a bunch of Biden's executive orders, and I looked through them.
I think that one's standard practice. I'm pretty sure. I don't think that one's like all that insane. Maybe some of the stuff he took out, I'm sure there's stuff I would disagree with taking out, but like, I don't think that one's like too ridiculous.
It looks like a lot of nonsense. Like when I was looking at it, it was like nothing that really matters that much. But and then the last one I had was, he had one that I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was all about ending DEI. And I saw some people who are federal employees who got these like crazy emails. They're saying like, basically asking them like, yeah, if you have any information regarding any DEI practices in your department, that you should send them over to us, basically.
DEI witch
Uh,
hunt?
yeah, it's a DEI. The purge of the DEI is going on, which in theory, I am for. I'm not a fan of DEI, but that's another one that's kind of like slippery slope, where it's like it's just so aggressive in like immediate, where it's like it's bound to raise a bunch of people's alarms. Everyone's gonna freak out. But I think overall we'd be a better place if we got rid of it.
I mean, is that one like, oh, we're gonna like fire DEI hires, or is that we're now stopping DEI hiring practices?
It's removal of any federal organizations that are designed as like DEI agencies, where like their jobs are to enforce or incentivize DEI in the private sector. So they'll have, I can't think of any of the actual names like off the top of my head, but I ran through a couple of them, and they'll be like, there was like, it's all the alphabet boys, but there's a bunch of new ones, and it'll be like the Agency of Diversity, and their mission is to make sure that there is enough people of color and women and all this stuff in there. And I think they're just dismantling all of those.
Yeah, I don't know. That's one of the ones that like, all right, diversity, equity, inclusion sounds great. Like I want diverse people, and I want an equitable division of, job opportunities. I want people to be included. It's just one of those that like comes down to, like really implementation versus like theory. So I don't know.
I think it's another one of the Inflation Reduction Acts, honestly, because it's called diversity, equity, and inclusion, but then most of the policies are like mandates or quotas on what, these different groups of people that we need to have hired, not based on anything. It's based on like immutable characteristics, not based on any merit. And by definition, you're just discriminating, kind of, like it doesn't. I don't like that. I think with DEI, my main thing on it is that it's either discriminatory or unnecessary. Because you see a lot of people make the argument where it's like, oh, well, we're not discriminating against anyone. We're just making sure that we give these underprivileged communities more opportunity. And it's like, well, it doesn't make any, there's a logical fallacy there, because it doesn't make any sense. If they were actually the most qualified people for the job, then we wouldn't need a quota. The free market would have hired them. If they're not, then by definition, you're discriminating against someone who's more qualified in order to hire someone based on color or gender or whatever,
Yeah, I think where that kind of is, it's like, all right, so it's merit based, right? I think it's kind of like, all right, so you can't like perfectly grade every single person's like aptitude for this job, right? Like, all right, this guy would be like a 93.34 like effective rate versus this guy at like a 91.11, right? So I think if it's one of those deals where it's like, all right, both of these people have the required like education and job experience, and like it's kind of just a protection in there, like, all right, make sure that you do have to hire some Black people who are like educated enough and have enough job experience, right? Like versus like, oh, like the meritocracy argument, like, oh, like if this guy has like, you can't like quantify it down to like the last detail of like who would be the best hire,
Yeah, but I mean, putting in laws that are like you have to hire this amount of Black people or this amount of women,
right?
It's like,
that's
why is the
discriminatory
color? I mean, why is the color of your skin or your gender? Why is that worth points on the scale? Like it doesn't make any sense. You should hire whoever's the most qualified. And I get the argument of like, well, we're trying to kind of even the playing field a little bit because, say, well, because of historic systemic racism, maybe the Black community has a little bit of a little bit less privilege than say a white male would. Okay, I mean, I get that part, but at the same time, then it's like, okay, but why are we basing it on? Why don't we just do it based on your financial status growing up? Did you grow up in a rough neighborhood? Did you overcome some obstacles? And on top of that, it's like, okay, maybe someone is a person of color or someone is a woman in an industry that's mostly hires men. Okay, that's one obstacle. That's one thing that they might be less privileged on. But I mean, you can really narrow that down. Okay, well, what if? All right, so I am not a minority or a woman, I'm a white man in the construction industry, which has been historically white men. Okay, but what if I were to say, yeah, but I actually I had, I've got diabetes or something like that, or so you can narrow it down to, like, everyone's life is individually different.
Well,
Whereas,
then,
like, it shouldn't
yeah.
be about that. It shouldn't be about, like, who has had the hardest time. We'll give them the job. I just don't see how that could lead us anywhere good.
Then another counter you'll see to it's like, oh, well, DEI is only brought up in like, white collar jobs, right? It's like, all right, well, if you look at, like you said, construction workers, I think that's like 90+% men. No, you don't see anyone calling for, oh, we need 50% women in construction, right? You only see we need 50% women in C-suite executive level things, right? So I don't know, but I think this was a pretty good episode, to be honest. Got through a lot, and we're definitely gonna retouch on politics, I'm sure, coming up.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
unavoidable.
can't escape it, can't escape
No.
it. But yeah, no, I think it was a solid episode. Want to close it out on one last kind of prediction slash
Oh yeah, yeah.
philosophy question here. Is I was trying to think about, so seeing what's happened in Trump's first couple days in office and kind of looking around the world. I know you mentioned on another episode how this wasn't just a United States thing. It's like all around the world, the opposed,
Incumbents
like
lost.
the incumbents lost. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do we think? And there was one other executive order that was a big one that goes along with this, which is that one of the big ones was that Trump pulled us, or he's executive order to pull us out of the World Health Organization and the Paris Climate
Paris.
Agreement.
Yep.
What do we think? Is this a broader trend that's going to happen throughout the world? What is the political trend that we're looking at? 4 years from now. Right now, we're a lot different politically and culturally than we were 4 years ago. What do we think 4 years from now looks like?
Yeah. So now, at the global aspect, I don't really know if I can speak to that much. I barely have a grasp on U.S. politics, so like other countries' politics, I'm not even gonna try and venture a guess at. But just for us, I think a lot of these were isolationist policies. Trying to get us away from what Trump would say bad deals that we have. Like I think the WHO, like we were paying into it more than like anyone else, which is the reason he wanted to get out of it. I don't really know the details about the Paris climate agreement, probably along the same lines, but definitely seeming towards isolationism. I saw that Trump has pulled foreign support for every country except for Israel and Egypt, and I think like one other one who's fighting Palestine. Kind of a funny one there. I think it's going to be more almost regressive in some aspects. I think we're going to see some forms of, personal autonomy start going a little bit. I think they might start going after a little bit more, abortion rights, and, equal opportunities, things like that, DEI. Sounds bad in my book. Other people, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I was going to say the same thing about it. It looks like because we're coming off of a long stretch of globalization where, our economies, we've created basically a global economy, a global information network. And it seems like we're cutting ties there. And I think that's why I asked about the whole world too, because I think that's going on in a lot of places where it's like not only just economy is obviously the biggest one, but even like the TikTok ban has to do with that too, where we're cutting networks off, where it's like, okay, now we're cutting ties with that network. They've got their own network. We've got our own network. And I don't know if that is a good thing or a bad thing. It seems like a bad thing on initial thought. But I think that it's kind of, there's trade-offs always, and one thing that, Klaus Schwab had talked about, I might have brought this up on a different episode too, was the globalization trilemma. Have I gone through this one yet?
I don't think so.
So it's a theory, and it just makes a lot of sense. Is that we're facing a trilemma because we've never been this globalized before, and there's three ideal things that we want, but we can only have two of them. And the three things are: one is uh, globalization. The other one is democracy, and the other one is national sovereignty.
Mhm.
And
Okay,
in order to have two of those, you have to sacrifice the third one. And I think there's the two sides. Really, what they're fighting over is, do we want to sacrifice globalization or national sovereignty? Whereas the Kamala campaign and kind of the Democrat platform has been more about sacrificing national sovereignty and going towards globalization. Whereas now we're seeing a switch. We're going back to nationalism and national pride and abandoning globalization. I do think that's a bad thing. I think globalization is somewhat inevitable, and if we're not all about it, then everyone else is, and we're going to end up isolated.
That's what I was gonna bring up. I didn't have the four Paris ones pulled up, but one thing I was gonna say on that was like, if everyone else is a part of this club and we are pulling ourselves out of this club, I think that's gonna negatively impact us.
Yeah,
We're so exceptional and incredible that we are immune to the trend of globalization, right?
right. No, I agree, and I mean it is a tricky situation because I'm not a fan of abandoning national sovereignty or democracy, and so it's like if you got to choose between the three, it's a tough one because you don't really want to get rid of any of them. Um, I mean, I don't know. I would probably choose. I don't know, man. I had to think about it, but
Why does democracy go away with globalization and national sovereignty?
well, because if so, so say, all right, we've got our own nations, right? We've got the
Yeah,
United States, all these other countries. That's national sovereignty. We've got our own
yeah,
nations with our own governments, and we have our own democracies. As we globalize and we form these global groups like the WHO or the WEF. So now our elected officials and ambassadors are representing our country in these groups. Whereas the power becomes centralized to it's almost like a global organization. It is a global organization. Whereas do our elected officials, are we going to be loyal to that global organization, or are we going to be loyal to the people who voted for us? Whereas if we wanted to, we can still have national sovereignty where we are our own nations and we belong to this other group. But now the people of our nations their vote no longer matters because we are forced to abide by the rules of this group that the people
okay.
don't get to vote on.
It's gonna be democracy, isn't it?
I
That's
unfortunately I know.
that's gonna
Well,
be the one to go. I mean, think about it right now. How much of a democracy are we really right now? Like,
right, yes,
not
exactly.
not not much. How much? I'm sure I brought this one up. Maybe the most thing to think about in the political discussion. Yale did a study about how much does an individual actually affect the laws that are passed, right? So they said if 100% of the American people supported a certain bill, it had about a 30% chance of getting passed. If 0% of the American population supported a bill, it had about a 30% chance of getting passed. If 100% of corporations wanted a bill passed, it had about a 60% chance of being passed. If 0% of corporations wanted it passed, it had about a 0% chance of being passed. What does that
Mhm.
tell you? It tells you that the American people really do not influence policy at all.
Yeah, no, I know. And that is, I think, like the underlying problem that a lot of these other problems kind of stem from is that we are at that crossroad. Whereas, like, I think a lot of the vote for Trump was a vote against the end of democracy for us, even though, I mean, whether or not he's actually going to do that, I think that's what he tried to represent was like, Kamala and Biden, they are for the World Health Organization. They're working for them on behalf of our country, whereas Trump's whole slogan is like, I don't work for them, I work for the people, which whether he's right or wrong, it hit home with a lot of people because I think a lot of people
Mhm.
are feeling that. Plus, we're outsourcing jobs to other countries where, it's like that whole thing. He's not wrong on Trump. Trump says it all the time, and he's not wrong on that. And that I think is why we're going to the I think people voted for deglobalization. People voted to bring jobs back rather than outsourcing all the tech jobs to India or somewhere. They want the jobs back. They want, rather than us being loyal to Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, we want to have our own national sovereignty back. And I mean, that comes with the sacrifice of globalization. Is it worth it? I don't know, because I think you're right, though. if that's what we choose to do, then we're no longer, eventually we're the little guy. We're not the big guy anymore because everyone else teamed up against us.
Right. So, all right. I think that's a pretty good spot to leave us off on.
All right, sounds good. Till next time.